He killed 140 men in the hot seat. Then, at that point, he ended his own life. The one who worked New York State's Old Sparky was quiet, gathered, and consistently proficient. Nobody realized that each flick of the switch was destroying him. It's 11 p.m. on Thursday, September 17, 1925, dark Thursday, to the occupants of Sing Jail in New York's Hudson Valley. The prisoners are secured for the evening, incapable to leave their cells. All with the exception of one. Detainee Julius Mill Operator, with 4 gatekeepers as well as the pastor close by, just strolled 20 speeds from the pre-execution holding up cells, called the ballroom, to the unbelievable passing house. He's remained close to the hot seat prisoners quite a while in the past, nicknamed Old Sparky. The superintendent asks him for any final words. He has none. The gatekeepers rapidly seat him, clasping dark calfskin lashes around his appendages and middle. The state electrical technician, John Hurlburt, a troubling confronted man in his late 50s, of normal level and wearing a dull suit and perfect dark shoes, ventures forward. His occupation has in essence obliterated him. Yet, Hurlburt's attitude doesn't deceive anything as he cautiously checks the terminal lash to the mill operator's right leg. The cathode is ready to rock and roll, and then wipe it contains absorbed saline solution, similarly as it ought to be. Hurlburt is quiet, indifferent, and completely proficient. Yet, he's gritting his teeth and a meager sheen of sweat enhances his harsh face. He would rather not do this, to continue to make it happen. Yet, he has no other option. He additionally doesn't realize that this, his 140th execution, will be his last. Hurlburt slides a cowhide protective cap over the mill operator's cautiously shaven head. It contains another anode and another wipe. He interfaces a link and guarantees the wing nut is finger tight, and that the terminal is flush against the skin. He wraps a dark calfskin veil around the detainee's face and pulls it tight, clasping it around the rear of the seat. The mill operator's eyes are currently clouded, yet Hurlburt, gradually falling to pieces, tries never to look at a detainee without flinching. It's sufficiently hard to toss the switch, harder still assuming he acknowledges in the smallest that he's going to kill without a second thought. All Hurlburt decides to consider are the specialized perspectives, mirroring a profound longing to get it over with, gather his check, and return home. With that, he makes a couple of moves to the niche where the switchboard pauses. All that remains is for the superintendent to make a motion. He does so right away, and Hurlburt jerks the switch. A dynamo murmurs, the sound rising and occupying the quiet room. The mill operator jerks forward and up, straining against the lashes. Hurlburt watches and works the dials, bringing the voltage up, down, then up once more. The detainee fits as the voltage rises and falls. Ringlets of smoke ascend from his head and leg. Hurlburt cuts the power and the specialist ventures forward, stethoscope close by. "I articulate this man dead," he says straight. A fragrance of consumed tissue lingers palpably in the midst of a stunning quiet. A fair outcome has been given. Or on the other hand maybe not. Sing Superintendent Louis E. Laws, who directed mill operators electric shock, when inquired as to whether the execution was actually any better than murder, answered derisively with, "As though one wrongdoing of such nature, done by a solitary man, acting separately, can be appeased by a comparable wrongdoing done by all men, acting by and large." From dime books to Theodore Dreiser's An American Misfortune to motion pictures like Heavenly Messengers with Filthy Countenances and The Green Mile, Old Sparky has given the outcome in endless, dearest American stories. In a tough situation, an expression got from the thought of death by the hot seat presently depicts terrible individual or expert quandaries. Old Blues norms name-check the seat, the last objective for the majority of African Americans throughout history. The death penalty has annihilated jail staff and killers also. They've experienced post-horrendous pressure problems, substance misuse, and misery. John Hurlburt, the second of New York's 5 state electrical technicians throughout history, was one of them. Brought into the world dressed in reddish, New York in September 1867, Hurlburt was at first recruited as a circuit repairman at Coppery Jail, the principal jail to have an execution via electric shock, that of William Kemmler on August 6, 1890. It was bungled horribly to such an extent that George Westinghouse, a trailblazer of the electrical business and Thomas Edison rival, commented, "They would have improved a hatchet." Kemmler's unfeeling demise didn't discourage New York and different states from doing more executions by means of the hot seat. To date, north of 4,300 individuals minus 695 of those in New York have strolled their last mile to ride the lightning, while executing 140 of Singh's 614 thunderclap jockeys. Hurlburt was, inwardly, gradually breaking down. At Reddish Jail, Hurlburt met Edwin Davis, the world's first electrocutioner. Like Hurlburt, Davis was a grim, calm, and withdrawn man. Colossally cryptic about his work, Davis executed 240 detainees somewhere in the range of 1890 and 1914. However, Davis himself professed to have no confidence in capital punishment. Prior to resigning, he prepared two associates, Hurlburt and Robert Green Elliott. Both helped at executions, themselves playing out a few under Davis' watch. Notwithstanding this, it was Davis who led the most active Dark Thursday in Singh's set of experiences when, on August 12, 1912, he shocked 7 men sequentially, a solitary day's state record. Those of the 7 holding on to kick the bucket unleashed devastation in their cells as they saw the others drive away, individually. The loathsomeness waited long in the brain of Singh's specialist Amos assistant, who depicted it subsequently. "We all in the execution chamber, witnesses and authorities, could hear them, as could those of the 7 who went first. The screaming and howling I heard that day is unbelievable. The situation resembled a bad dream, incredible but terrible." Hurlburt had Davis spot and Elliott supplanted Hurlburt. The territory of New York, in the interim, decreased the number of hot seats, in the event that not use. Initially utilizing 3, those at the Reddish and Dannemora remedial offices were disposed of. By 1915, Singh had an exclusively constructed, most extreme security office exclusively used to limit and execute New York's denounced. Formerly named the Censured Cells, this office acquired overall notoriety as the Demise House. Singh's prisoners called it something different, the Butcher House. Hurlburt's most memorable authority commitment saw him take on a twofold obligation: the executions of George Coyer and Giuseppe Di Goya at Coppery Jail on August 31, 1914. Hurlburt drew $150 for solitary work, with an additional $50 for each head for the second prisoner forward. 2 times he executed 5, acquiring himself $400 for the night's work. His better half Matty was persistently sick. Doctors' visit expenses stacked up. In this way, long after Hurlburt started to despise the work, it was executions that took care of them. The pressure. He attempted frantically to stay unknown, never talking about essentially never stopped. Executions with family or companions. The press continually attempted to sneak a photo, however, they were rarely fruitful. Hurlburt had requested his name be kept a mystery, yet that main energized columnists, and it wasn't well before his name made the papers. High-profile executions made mystery considerably harder, and there were a lot of those. Famous detainees pulled in huge press interest. Hurlburt executed New York's famous executioner cop Charles Becker and the 4 assassins Becker recruited to kill speculator Herman B.N.C. Rosenthal. He tossed the switch on Playboy poisoner Arthur Warren Waite. At the point when Hans Schmidt turned into America's just Catholic cleric executed for homicide, Hurlburt executed him. The paper-box youngster, Orest Shilatoni, the main effective escapee from Singh's amazing passing house, kicked the bucket at Hurlburt's hand when recovered. The more noteworthy the interest, the harder it became for Hurlburt to stay mysterious, and like Davis before him, he dreaded retaliation. The more executions he played out, the more foes he figured he had. More regrettable still were bungled executions. Not very many killers go their whole profession without botches, and Hurlburt's was not one of them. Charles Becker shook so savagely that he popped the limiting chest tie and required 3 shocks prior to passing on. Thomas Tarpey, the second of the 5 Hurlburt executed on September 3, 1915, required 5 shocks. Then, at that point, there were the dreamlike executions. At the point when Hurlburt executed Leo Yankovsky and Walter Lewandowski in 1920, Yankovsky, in steady wretchedness, remained adjacent to the seat wailing with alleviation that his life would before long be finished. Another detainee made an inquisitive last solicitation, wishing to play out his last stroll on his hands. Hurlburt's most memorable sight of him came as he entered the execution chamber topsy-turvy. However, the bills continued to come. So did executions in New York, New Jersey, Massachusetts, and further away from home. Hurlburt directed Nebraska's first when Elson Cole and Alan Graham were consumed in 1920. So as well, nearly, did Hurlburt. He escaped a party of insulted capital punishment rivals taking steps to lynch him. Hurlburt's demeanor progressively deteriorated. Jail staff detailed customary hollering and the tossing of hardware around the passing chamber before executions. Hours before a triple execution on April 30, 1925, Hurlburt at long last fell. Recuperating to the point of tossing the switch, he spent 7 days in Singh's emergency clinic. After 2 additional executions, of John Durkin and Julius Mill operator, he abruptly surrendered on January 16, 1926. Detainees John Slattery and Ambrose Ross were glad. Booked for execution on January 20th, their sentences were subsequently driven, thanks to some degree to the deferral. At the point when gotten some information about his unexpected acquiescence, Hurlburt said, "I became weary of killing individuals." Emil Klatt and Luigi Rapido weren't. By January 29, New York had delegated Davis' other student Robert Elliott. State regulation required killers to be qualified circuit repairmen of a good person and ideally experienced. Of more than 150 candidates, Elliott was the main choice. With Elliott named, Klatt and Rapido were ill-fated. Serving until 1939, Elliott had indented numbers 1 and 2 of his inevitable 387. Notwithstanding having been collaborators, Elliott was disparaging of Hurlburt, crediting hazardous executions like Tarpey and Becker to Hurlburt's supposed absence of procedure. As Elliott turned out to be New York's most popular, most productive killer, Hurlburt's decay just sped up. His better half Matty kicked the bucket in September 1925. On February 22, 1929, pain-stricken and tormented, Hurlburt entered the cellar of his coppery home. In his grasp was the gun he'd conveyed while Reddish Jail's common electrical expert 20 years sooner. His body was found by his child Clarence. The authorities' reason for death was self-destruction. Dr. Assistant had persevered through 138 executions. He additionally surrendered, expressing, "The loathsomeness of that one obligation developed on me until I could never again bear it." Jail clergyman Father Cashin unexpectedly withdrew to a common ward, his reasons formally undefined. Head guardian Fred Dorner, head of the execution group, likewise experienced a mental meltdown. Hurlburt was dead, however old Sparky wasn't. Thousands more broiled before the gas chamber, then, at that point, deadly infusion, delivered it out of date. Singh's last electric shock, of killer Eddie Lee Mays, was in August 1963. The previous passing house is presently a professional place where detainees gain proficiency with an exchange before parole, scratching days off their schedules more ideally than their ancestors. The seat is presently a show at the museum in Washington, D.C.